It was a quiet Sunday morning, December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor looked completely peaceful. Battleships rested calmly in the harbor. Sailors were beginning another ordinary day, and no one imagined that within minutes, history would change forever. But nearly 140 miles away, someone had already seen the first sign of disaster. High above Oahu, at the Opana radar station, a 19-year-old U.S. Army Signal Corps radar operator was finishing what should have been a routine shift. The radar had been switched on for extra training. He expected to see an empty screen, but what appeared next immediately caught his attention. The radar suddenly displayed a massive cluster of aircraft unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't just a few planes. It looked like an entire formation moving rapidly toward Hawaii. For a moment, he wondered if the machine had failed. Then he realized it was working perfectly. Knowing something was terribly wrong, the young operator grabbed the field telephone and urgently reported what he was seeing. Every second mattered. He described the enormous formation approaching the island, hoping someone would understand the danger before it was too late. The warning reached the information center, where a duty officer listened carefully. But there was one important assumption. American B-17 bombers from the mainland were expected to arrive that morning. Believing the radar had detected those friendly aircraft, the report was dismissed. The operator slowly placed the telephone back on its hook. Deep down, something still didn't feel right. The radar screen continued showing the formation growing larger with every passing minute. Yet there was nothing more he could do except watch and wait. Far across the Pacific Ocean, the truth was already racing toward Hawaii. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft flew silently in perfect formation, staying low enough to avoid early detection. Their mission had been planned for months, and surprise was the key to its success. Back at Pearl Harbor, life continued as normal. Sailors cleaned the deck, officers prepared for another routine day, and the harbor remained calm. No alarms were sounding. No one knew that enemy aircraft were now only minutes away. The radar operator kept staring at the glowing screen. The blips were getting closer, larger, impossible to ignore. He had done exactly what he was trained to do. But sometimes, history isn't changed by what people see. It's changed by whether anyone chooses to believe them. Then, just before 8 o'clock, the peaceful Hawaiian sky was interrupted by the sound of aircraft engines. The warning had been real all along. Within moments, Pearl Harbor would become the scene of one of the most devastating surprise attacks in American history. Inside the radar station, the aircraft formation kept moving closer. The young operator couldn't understand how something this massive could simply be ignored. Every sweep of the radar confirmed the same terrifying picture. Whatever was coming, it was almost here. He reported the contact one final time, hoping someone higher up would take another look. But the answer didn't change. The officers believed the radar had picked up the expected American B-17 bombers. The warning was filed away, and precious minutes slipped by. This wasn't a failure of the radar. The equipment worked exactly as it was designed. The real problem was human judgment. One assumption, that the incoming aircraft were friendly, overpowered the evidence displayed on the screen. Meanwhile, the Japanese strike force stayed on course across the Pacific. Lying in complete radio silence, the pilots followed their carefully rehearsed plan. Their greatest weapon wasn't just bombs or torpedoes, it was surprise. At Pearl Harbor, the atmosphere remained calm. Sailors joked with one another, officers prepared for the day's routine, and many ships were still at anchor. No one realized that the peaceful morning would soon turn into chaos. Months of planning had gone into the operation. Japanese commanders studied maps, practiced attack formations, and trained their pilots relentlessly. Every detail was designed to strike the U.S. Pacific Fleet before it had any chance to react. The attack force now approached the Hawaiian Islands. Pilots checked their instruments one last time. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and Zero fighters spread into their assigned formations. The moment they had trained for had finally arrived. Back inside the radar station, the operator watched the final radar sweep. The aircraft were now so close that there was no longer any doubt. He had seen the danger before anyone else, but the opportunity to stop it had already passed. Just a few miles away, American sailors continued their normal duties. Some were eating breakfast. Others prepared equipment for another peaceful Sunday. They had no idea that enemy aircraft were already descending toward the harbor. At exactly the wrong moment, history reached its turning point. One warning had been received, but never acted upon, and in the next few minutes, the skies above Pearl Harbor would erupt into fire, smoke, and destruction. At 7:48 that morning, the silence was shattered. Japanese aircraft suddenly appeared over Pearl Harbor, diving toward the harbor at incredible speed. Within seconds, explosions echoed across the base. The warning had been real, but now it was far too late. Torpedo bombers flew low across the water, releasing their weapons directly toward the American battleships. Sailors rushed to their battle stations as sirens finally sounded. Confusion turned into panic, and the peaceful harbor became a battlefield almost instantly. Aboard the USS Arizona, crew members fought desperately to respond. Some tried to fire anti-aircraft guns, while others searched for safety. Then, in a single devastating moment, a bomb penetrated the ship's forward magazine. The explosion that followed was catastrophic. A massive fireball rose hundreds of feet into the air, tearing the battleship apart. In just seconds, more than 1,000 American sailors lost their lives aboard the Arizona. It became one of the deadliest moments of the entire attack. Across Pearl Harbor, acts of extraordinary courage unfolded. Sailors ignored the danger around them, carrying wounded shipmates through smoke and burning fuel. Rescue boats moved between damaged ships as explosions continued all around them. Miles away at the radar station, the young operator watched thick columns of smoke rise over Pearl Harbor. He didn't need anyone to tell him what had happened. The mysterious aircraft he had seen on the radar had finally arrived. Japanese fighters swept across nearby airfields, destroying American aircraft before many could even take off. The attack had been carefully planned to eliminate any immediate response. Within minutes, the defenders were fighting simply to survive. The harbor was now covered in smoke, fire, and shattered steel. Battleships burned fiercely, while rescue crews searched for survivors in the water. What had begun as a quiet Sunday morning had become one of the darkest days in American history. Even in the middle of the destruction, courage never disappeared. Sailors, medics, and volunteers risked their own lives to save others. Their bravery couldn't stop the attack, but it saved countless lives during those terrifying hours. *. When the attack finally ended, the damage was almost beyond belief. Battleships lay destroyed, aircraft were reduced to wreckage, and thousands of lives had been changed forever. Pearl Harbor would never be the same again, and neither would the United States. As the smoke slowly cleared, America began to understand the true scale of the disaster. More than 2,400 people had been killed, over 1,000 were wounded, and much of the Pacific Fleet had been damaged or destroyed. It was a day the nation would never forget. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress. Speaking with quiet determination, he called December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. His words united a shocked nation and marked the beginning of a new chapter in American history. Within hours, Congress voted to declare war on Japan. Across the country, families gathered around their radios, listening in silence. In a single day, America had gone from watching the war from a distance to becoming one of its central participants. Recruitment offices quickly filled with volunteers. Young men stepped forward to serve, while factories transformed into engines of wartime production. Across the nation, ordinary citizens prepared themselves for the sacrifices that lay ahead. The harbor was now covered in smoke, fire, and shattered steel. Battleships burned fiercely, while rescue crews searched for survivors in the water. What had begun as a quiet Sunday morning had become one of the darkest days in American history. Japan had hoped the surprise attack would weaken America's will to fight. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Pearl Harbor united the country like never before, creating a determination that would shape the outcome of World War II. The young radar operator often found himself thinking back to that quiet Sunday morning. He had seen the danger, trusted his training, and reported exactly what the radar showed. His story became a lasting reminder that even the clearest warning can be overlooked. In the days that followed, rescue crews worked tirelessly around the clock. Some damaged ships were repaired and returned to service, while others remained where they had fallen, silent reminders of the lives lost during the attack.